And welcome back. Let's go ahead and jump right into an example of using for each loops. In this, we have a problem set up here that we can go ahead and tackle, as well as trying to figure out how to implement these loops. So this problem says create a program that's used to enter a array of 10 doubles, and then we are going to find the average of those numbers, and then we're going to demonstrate this with a for and a for each loop. So the first thing we want to do, of course, is figure out how to fill this array. So we, of course, are going to need our scanner class to go ahead and be able to get that user input. And then let's go ahead and create our initial array. And so since it's a double array, so we want to use a double type, and we're going to use our square brackets, and let's just call this one R. And then we're going to set this equal to a new double. Now, I'm going to leave this as is right now because I don't know the size of this. So that means I first need to get the user input for the size. Now, we of course are using 10 doubles here, so I can of course assume this case is 10. So I can easily plug in 10. But if I wanted to have an array where they set the size or they choose, then I need to get user input first. In fact, why don't we go ahead and take this to the next level? Instead of just saying of 10 doubles, why don't we just say of doubles? And then what we can do is actually use that input. So system.out.println, please enter the size of your array. And then we can just have a integer, and we can say, let's call that our size, and we'll equal that to kb.nextInt. And now with that set up, we can actually make this into just an array of size, our size. And so that way we're not tied into a statically assigned array. Obviously, if we did want to do a specific number for our array, we could do, again, change it back to just 10. But we're going to make our program a little bit more dynamic here and allowing us to get that user input. Now what we want to do is, of course, move on to actually filling that array. And we, of course, can do that with a for loop. Now, we, of course, using something like a for each loop is something that might be possible, but I think for filling the array, I think we're going to stick with demonstrating a for loop, which of course would satisfy this piece of the criterion. It says use both a for and a for each loop. So let's use a regular for loop, and we're going to say for int I is equal to 0, and we're going to say as long as I is less than r.length, and we're always going to use r.length because in this case r is the name of the array. And remember, arrays have that length instance variable, and that allows us to easily pull that in there without having to know exactly what the size is. I could pull in our size to use that as well, but using the r.length here is probably a little bit better approach because it's going to kind of set us up for other array types that we may have a statically assigned value. All right, and then we have our I++, and all we're going to do is we want to fill the array. So I'm just going to give a quick prompt, so system.out.println, please enter a value for the array. And then we can, of course, actually start filling that. So we'll just say r of I. Remember, I, of course, is referring to the index of that array, is going to be equal to kb.nextDouble. So now we, of course, are filling that array with a double. And so we can now use that array to actually calculate average. And you can see I've gone ahead and set up a method that will allow me to pass that array in. Now I'm going to go ahead and call calculate average here. And what do I want to pass into this function? Well, if you look, this method takes in an array of type double. So we have an array of type double, which is R. Now, I could, of course, have this just be called a different name here. I just happen to have the same name. It doesn't have to be. Like, this could be just A, and it would still work just as well. Because remember, this is a variable that's local to this function, whereas this is a variable that's local to our main method here. So with that set up, we can now actually build out the function that's going to allow us to calculate those elements. And so what we really want to do is kind of look at how can we calculate that average. Well, let's go ahead and just set up an integer, and we're going to call this sum, or maybe total. And let's set that equal to 0. And then what we want to do then is traverse through that array so we can actually calculate that average. So we're going to say for, and since we've already used our regular for loop, let's go ahead and try to do this with a for each loop. So if you remember how these are set up, we have to first specify what type. Well, we know that our array that we're feeding in is of type double, so we're going to say double. And we can say for each double element, so I'm just going to abbreviate that as ELE, colon, because that means for each element in. And then where are we pointing that? For each element in the array, of course, that we're looking at is A. So that's just a nice, easy way to see that. And then we can just open, close curly brackets. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to simply say the sum, or excuse me, the total is equal to total plus the element. And all it's going to do is add that back. And now you notice we have a small error here. All right, what is it saying? Type mismatch, can't convert. Oh, because what did I do? I made the double a integer. So let's fix that as a double. Now, of course, that is set. Now, of course, I could also add these things back in, but I think doing this double is double total looks really good. That should give me the sum of everything within that array. Now, the only thing I need to do is divide it by the number of elements. So if we have this array that we're using here, we're feeding it in, I can then say total is equal to total divided by a dot length. Because remember, we can then use that length to know how many elements are in there. If it is an array of 10 elements, then the length should be 10. So we're going to go ahead and set that in. And let's go ahead then, and because this is a void method, we can go ahead and print that right out. So system.println, the average is total. Now, assuming I didn't make any mistakes in my code here, I should be able to go ahead and run this. And if we do have mistakes, we can go ahead and fix up. So giving it a quick run. So let's enter the size array. Let's do something simple here. Let's just do 5. And we're going to enter in a value for the array. So let's just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because then we know the average will be 3. Pretty simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, and we get the average is 3.0. All right, that works great. What if I had values that weren't quite so nice? All right, so let's again go up to 10, which was the original value we had said, and let's just choose some random number. So I'm going to say 1, about 2.2, about 6, about -3, 52. I'll do a 1 again, 7, 0.2, 0, 4. And we get the average is 7.04000001. Excellent. Our program works great. And the nice thing is we have demonstrated, of course, a for loop. And we've also demonstrated a for each loop. Now, could I have taken this for each loop and written it as a for loop? Yes. It would have looked very similar to kind of what we had done here. The only difference is if I had done this with a for loop, it would have looked like this. For int I is equal to 0. I is less than a dot length, I plus plus, and then I would just said total is equal to total plus a of I. That would have been the only difference between those. So you can see that it's very similar. The biggest difference is that this function, we only had to worry about one criteria here in header. Here I got to take care of where am I starting. Here I have how long this is going for, what is the incrementer. So these, of course, are both valid ways to handle this function. But I hope that gives you a good understanding of how to use both a for and a for each loop, and how we can use those with arrays in our code.